don't think I need to explain Jack Kerouac to a San Francisco audience.
Not a teacher.
Some strange world, never seen this before, never, not the Caribbean. When, here's Martinique, carved myself out a place at a gay B&B. I mean, can you believe it? Some rainbow sign right there by the door, exclusively gay. Not one woman, of course, to be seen, but that's not the find, not the purpose. It's like I've just been declared, made all right somehow, that the beaches and all this tropical air are for me too, the likes of it. Hadn't noticed I'd been sleeping so many hours, long ones. Had been pulling those covers over my head come early evening. Man, I'd been sleeping long and hard for 4 months back in Guyana. Felt guilty the second night here in Martinique, sat at a cafe, ate an expensive dinner and watched the people passing by on the street. Their diaper bags cost more, I'm sure, than a monthly wage back home. Home in Guyana, that is. I'll call it that for now till I'm out. And matching hair buns. Family of girls walked by in their real label stuff, and all had matching hair buns tied with the same matching string. I started cursing myself right then, feeling really guilty, knowing there were people back there in that other home who could have used a meal, who could have paid for a month's food with what it cost for a simple pair of those tennis shoes everyone's sporting. Then I got to thinking again the next day about things because I felt so alive. I kicked myself out of bed and cursed the dragged, overslept feeling in my head, vowing to have no more of that. Felt so tingly with choice and didn't know where to start. And suddenly this heaviness left my chest and even eyebrows, and I felt so light. Hadn't noticed till that very moment that I'd just spent winter in Guyana. The snowbanks coming through on email from Newfoundland. Worst winter recorded in 50 years. And I suffered it blow by blow in my Guyana apartment with the air conditioning on. Wasn't that there was really winter, of course, but it was that season of hibernating. And see, the two places, Guyana and Newfoundland, are just so bloody similar in ways. I went through winter right there on the edge of South America, suffered a memory of bears in caves, became one, and I have to admit it had a lot to do with the garbage rotting and heat on the roads. The dengue there too, I suppose, festering in trenches all around the town. I even felt that same kind of isolated that comes with living in a place not many leave. You adopt it too. The staying put, that is. You absorb it all, don't cross borders, hunker and hold on. It's as if you get used to living in a place when you don't get out or can't. You get used to hanging on if you hang long enough, and you normalize whole heaps of shit. Like those Pentecostal churches in both Newfoundland and Guyana, praying hellfire and damnation, praying for my kind. And what you do is you just bury yourself in potlucks and hikes up mountains and exchange stories about kids you know will probably end up in juvie. How you're so fucking interested in their school lessons and swimming lessons and how all that matters. And really you don't give a damn half the time. But there's nothing else to do to talk about, because that's what people do. They fuck, have kids, talk about lessons, raise grandkids, and fucking die. But I rolled into Martinique, and man, the whole world opened up. Sometimes you just come alive, I guess, and I realized I'd been quivering under a whole pile of stuff I was scared to admit existed and thought I couldn't speak about. Then I thought, man, I've done time here. Maybe 2 years all told in the Caribbean. And I've lived it, not just visited. That's more than tourist time anyway. Different places, different islands, chunks of mainland, and maybe I've got a right to speak and be uncomfortable and admit I've sunk into a terrible depression, not just by myself, but with a whole heap of stuff that comes with these worlds that people try to prettify and stick in magazines with their turquoise fucking blue and no clue about how it really works. I was smitten with the island of Martinique and thought, wow, I could even fuck a lady here, marry her too. and chances are I wouldn't be murdered. And I could maybe tell the next guy who approached me to fuck himself silly, and I wouldn't get arrested for profanity or have eyebrows raised at me like maybe I would in other places. And maybe I could even deck him if he didn't stop. And I suddenly realized how tense I had become if I were actually thinking of hitting someone, and how happy I'd instantly become too, seeing those rainbow colors outside the door before I locked myself in for the night with men who never even looked at me that way, because this was gay exclusive and right in the fucking Caribbean, if you can believe that. And I could have dinner and walk the streets without anyone asking me for something, for money, cigarettes, and yeah, sex. And I must admit I did and do feel kind of guilty, because I know people don't ask for money or food if they don't need it. And more than that, this here's a department, you've got to remember. I called it a colony just after arriving here my first night. And this guy I'd just met raised his eyebrows and kind of turned away. And I won't do that again. But I'm wondering if it's wrong to like a colony or department. And I'm thinking of Naomi back in Jamaica, who said she cried the day the Union Jack came down. And I didn't understand her until now. Man, years back I was full of Manly and Castro and Césaire and Fanon, the lot of them. I would have wallpapered my house with all their photos if I'd had the chance, and still might if I figure out that Martinique has just fucked my head up. But boy, if you think about it, everything that's gone independent down here seems half in the shitter. Or maybe that's just from a present tainted perspective sitting here on this departmental island. But let's breathe cops, shall we? Just for a second. Guyanese cops in that independent nation standing at roadblocks, topping up their salaries and the commissioners to make rent and electricity. Something's wrong with that. And one of them shoving a baton up the ass of a young man brought in for a petty crime to show him something, teach him good. And now that guy can't walk properly or take a proper shit for the rest of his life. The hospital out of colostomy bags too. What a mess. But then again, there's before Manly and Castro and before independence. And you want to breathe even before that? The crimes of slavery and possession and colony? Man, it would make a corrupt police department pale. But try being a white dyke down here in the Caribbean. Or just a dyke. Try being a dyke in Newfoundland. No script for that at all. Not in the rural anyway. And here's where the eyebrows raise, I'm sure, or the attention drifts off. 'Cause see, this isn't Kerouac fucking his way all through good old America. This isn't Jack jumping trains and trucks, no thought of being raped, and having a great old time boozing and fucking and oozing his male genius all the way from New York to San Francisco. This here's about fitting into weirdly similar and different worlds. From Newfoundland to the Caribbean, as crows and John Crows fly. And sometimes there's not a smidge of difference, and sometimes there's huge things. I'm thinking right now maybe both places, Newfoundland and Guyana, could fuck right off. And I'll just stay in Martinique, or maybe take from this place what I've learned in about 2 nights and head straight to San Francisco, or Soho, or South Beach, and do what Kerouac might have done if he'd been me. Tonight, I watched the green ray flash when the sun disappeared into the Caribbean Sea, and I hadn't seen that before, or hadn't noticed. The sun was gone in a second, had been so brilliant, the size of a medicine ball, orange on the horizon, then a millisecond of green, color of the northern lights. That's how quick it was, like life. And no one's going to give you medals or build you statues for sticking it out where you're not wanted. Not unless you're St. Ignatius Loyola or some other twisted sort who's endorsed by high-end power. So it was like Martinique told me to stop fooling myself, stop jerking myself around, it said. And it told me as quickly as that sun disappeared and fractured itself in a broken tongue. Hell, I'm not even feeling guilt for the Pentecostal churches or the Catholic churches that haunt the countries of the Caribbean, valleys and hills of Newfoundland. I don't give a shit about eternal souls. because I haven't met anything yet that smacked of an eternity I'd care to live. Not even Martinique, though it talks of some hope, seems to point with peninsulas and its own chunks of ocean to some other alternative. And I know at least one guy who thinks the churches can fuck off too, and he seems to have a hard-on for St. Peter. But wait, now I'm recalling Grenada, island where I stopped just before here, and the bulletin board outside the museum exhibit of the Revolution and American invasion. And I'm remembering all the words people pinned, as they probably wore much the same gear as those walking the beaches here in Martinique. "Thank God the US came," one of them read, and "Hey, I was a soldier during the Revolution, glad to do my part." And there wasn't one damn note that maybe questioned Reagan or mentioned the hospital that had been blown up or the medical students who had been used to wage his fucking illegal war. It's like I turned communist again right after dinner. And during the walk home, I got as confused as the Caribbean first made me. The whole south of it years back, when I arrived in Kingston, Jamaica, and thought after 2 days that the recommendation I move there was a fucking joke from someone who might not like me. And when I soon grew addicted to the energy and rhythm of the streets, and later took to curling in a ball for a good 2 weeks when I returned to North America and its silence, all its rules and regulations, the stuff that bored Neruda. And here I turn back to juggling and adjudicating dependencies and independencies, Caribbeans and European governments, local and foreign laws, and I got really confused. Take imported fruit in both independent and dependent Caribbean nations. You should see the American apples flooding into Caribbean islands these days, and grapes and pears. Makes about as much sense as importing red wine into France. Now, who would do that? And I've seen more than one farmer tightening some loose belt on sorry sticking out ribs, accepting coppers for some grand mango or pineapple that should cost a whole lot more. And you can't tell me no one's suffering starvation, that kind of game doesn't hit people living a hard life and trying to do an honest day's work in a field, and that there isn't some huge, sinister capitalist plot behind it all. And I'm sure people are dying from that kind of pressure. And I'm not sure how to measure things like transgender and gay murders and the imprisonment of gays against those dying from imported fruit. It was then I got to thinking this whole trip might have been careless in some way or another. There's only so much ocean you can take before you realize you're swimming the same strip of blue. Here I was thinking the tan would last forever. And so what if it did? It was kind of futile and silly after all. For some strange reason, I had a flash of remembrance, green ray recall, shall we say, of going into a shop in Guyana and asking for spray for the sun, and being handed something I read was a bleaching agent. And I handed it back to the saleswoman who was doing her best to help out and said, "No thanks, I'm already white. I'm looking to get darker. Do you have anything with low SPF?" And she didn't, and suggested vegetable oil. And I shook my head, and we were both kind of confused, and I laughed, and I recalled this sitting on the beach here in Martinique, desperate for a bit of the drop beat, and someone to hassle me to buy coconut water, and realizing I hadn't seen one jelly coconut for sale, and I wanted to fly away. And then I got all the more confused, returned back to the B&B, and took to nude sunbathing on the roof, because there was a sign inside the Rainbow House that said, "This way to San Francisco, take off all your clothes, all ye who enter." And I realized I'd gotten all my desires and information mixed up. So I just baked for a while and tried to get dark and sat in the tropics thinking of all the women I wanted to fuck. Sat there, all naked by myself, and thinking of the dykes I'd heard of here, my type, but not having seen one, though the house was packed one night with fellow queers, men that is. And they sat and talked French, and I barely understood one word, and I was so fucking embarrassed to be Canadian. And I couldn't help thinking that that was the most I'd fit in a long while. It was more community I'd ever had back in rural Newfoundland, more than in Guyana. certainly a bit more than a couple of other places down here, which I edged my way into over the years, discovering there was indeed a Caribbean lowdown and that it simply had to be low down. But now, the confusing thing is there's way more to life than finding fellow gays and spotting rainbow flags. There's mountains and rivers, neat new animals, languages and landscapes, people and food, and the classy, classy world of the Caribbean, where people know a thing or two about style and life and why we play dress up. And there's that rugged world of Newfoundland too. I swear at times the lost winter child of the West Indies that somehow gets in your blood, kind of like Guyana does, and lets you carve something unique and all your own out of rugged, not yet done worlds, and says goodnight to you, even if you are a stranger. And so I want to stay again and go, and all of a sudden the world is the same again and different, but not so different as to make me not question and plant immediate roots. And so I'm watching myself watching the road in front of the evening cafe, the rain softly dripping, the sun breaking through with some promise of rainbows, just like in the scriptures, some kind of green ray flash with the drop of every sun. Thank you.